All right. Well, good morning or afternoon or whenever you are going to see this. My name is Arpal Singh. I am, I call myself an educator and an entrepreneur both. I have been involved with various startups. I have a company where I now help all the startups in the art of growth, marketing, as well as sales. And the focus for me generally is B2B. So let me dive in. So this is a presentation which is rather long. It is supposed to cover various aspects, all the way from product management to understanding the sales and marketing funnel to how to do your initial sales. And I think probably the most important thing for an entrepreneur is probably part 3, because I'm assuming you guys got your product right. But just there are few highlights I would talk about in the product area. So this is what I call the basic 6 W's of the product. Understanding who is your customer. A lot of times this is probably, it looks like the easiest thing to do, but it really isn't. And people tend to confuse who is their customer with who is actually the influencer versus who writes the check versus who is the user. And sometimes you have to satisfy all the masters, but it is really important to understand exactly who is your customer. And this is an exercise that is number 1, because all your messaging, and if you have 2 or 3 masters that you have to satisfy, then you've got to make sure that your messaging resonates with each of them at one level or another. Sometimes you choose one of them because they are more critical than the others, and that's perfectly fine. The second thing that is really important is to be very clear on, are you trying to solve a problem, i.e., are you an aspirin, or are you trying to create a new habit? Facebook today is an aspirin, but it was a vitamin when it came in. We didn't know we could live without it. We were living without it, right? So you have to be very, very clear, because the strategy will also be different. Your messaging will be very different. And then the third W, which is the really important one, is why you? If you are solving the problem, I'm sure there are others who are solving this problem. Or a customer already has the solution to this problem. So why now? Why you? So one of the exercises that I do in my classes that I teach, as well as when I talk to entrepreneurs, is an exercise of trying to get your message in one line. That's the hardest thing to do. In fact, some of the very well-known companies struggle with it. So this is really important, because that message is going to be flashed everywhere on your website and everywhere else. And so it is really, really important you get that right. There's always a confusion about, what should I call my product? And startups tend to have this problem of trying to create too many names. They will have one company name, one product name, and suddenly there are 5 product names and a 1 company name. It is so important, because as a startup, you're already struggling to establish one brand name. And on top of that, if you create 5 or 6 different brand names that you have to work for, you just don't have the resources. So therefore, it is really important as to what do you call your product. And you have to really be very, very careful about that, and don't try to create a soup of multiple product names. Now, how much to sell it for? Now, this is really, this in itself is a course, right? Because how you sell for a B2B company versus a B2C company is entirely different. If you haven't had a chance to look at how to build a $100 million company using the analogy of different animals, you should Google it. And it is probably an interesting way for you to understand, hey, how would I build? Because I'm assuming that all of you want to build a large company. I'm assuming that you're all going to look for outside investment. So the VCs are looking for, can you really show me a path to 100 million ARR, annual recurring revenue? So how do you show the path depends on your product, your market, and how you approach the market. So if you are somebody like, say Google Office, the Office 365 or Slack or somebody like that, you could start with a lower price point, but get lots of users and then maybe do an enterprise deal at the other end. And then you could be like Snowflake, where you are really doing no less than $100,000 to $200,000 per sale. And so there are many, many ways to achieve how to get to market. And it is not just about, so we are not in the age of my cost plus this. Those days are gone. What you have to look for is, what is the market going to bear? And where is the market at? And how are you going to be, competitively speaking? I think the number 6 is also very critical, which is the yellow one. Who will you partner with? So as a startup, you got to understand there are always going to be elephants in your space. There are companies that are bigger than you that really don't even know you exist. And so startups have what I call 3 ways to survive in front of an elephant. One is you can stand in front of it, which means you better run very, very fast, i.e. you're competing with some giant on their turf. Not a very smart strategy most of the time. Very few companies have been able to execute it well. Or if you look at how an elephant walks, there is always a lot of room under the legs. This is what I call a feature companies. Meaning, yes, you've gotten a feature which the big company hasn't gotten around to it. It's possible you might be able to build a large company, but the chances are, even without knowing you exist, an elephant might end up trampling on you. So therefore, be careful. The best ride for a startup, as it concerns elephant or elephants in the space, is to find a way to ride on top of them, i.e. build a relationship with 1 or 2 of the giants in the space where you can really ride that wave, because you're going to need that to scale your business. Okay. So this is, again, this is an abridged version, knowing your customers, segmenting your customers, understanding who's your customer. There are lots of examples there. How do you really come up with a pricing? How do you come up with a company name? This is the elephant analogy I gave you. Understanding your company strategy, how you sell, again, trying to decide a pricing depends on what's your customer acquisition cost. And then I have this whole thing about how do you calculate, so I've come up with, believe it or not, a mathematical version of looking at it, that the channel, how do you distribute your product? So the channel is a function of how you deliver your product, what kind of assistance do you need, what type of customer you're going after, and what's your average sale price. And we don't have time to go through the examples of this, but I think this is a very important lesson before I end this particular section, which is, thanks to Dilbert, it says if everyone exposed to a product likes it, the product will not succeed. The reason that a product everyone likes will fail is because no one loves it. So your challenge as a startup, as a founder, is to find out those users who are going to love your product or make users love your product, meaning build that love into your product. If there are many people who say, yeah, it's nice, I use it sometimes, that's not enough. If you have a million users who are in that camp, that's of no value. Having 100 or 1,000 users in a B2C case who really love you, who are willing to go out on a limb and talk about you, is what is going to make you succeed as a product company, as a startup. So therefore, focus a lot on building that product that you would find. And again, in the initial stages, we tend to give the product to everybody, but maybe there is only a certain segment for which your product is most valid, and that's okay. And if you find people in that segment who love your product, excellent. So your challenge in the phase one of your product is finding those 100 to 1,000 users who really love your product. If your product goes away, they would really miss it. That is the challenge for you in the product phase. Now, the second phase is understanding your sales and marketing funnel. And let me tell you, these days of customer finding you on their own are gone. You have to really find them. Now, whether you are selling one or you're selling a B2B or B2C, it really doesn't matter. What is really important is, and oh, by the way, this is one sales and marketing funnel. If you Google it, you'll probably find 1,000 versions of it. But again, it's not about the accuracy that I am after, but about the concept. And the concept is that there are many, many people who come to your website, who you come in contact with. They're nothing but your suspects. They're really not prospects yet. They only become your prospects once you've taken them through what I call a qualification wall. So think of this as the old days where you could go to a store and somebody was doing the selling to you. In the new world, we do the same thing digitally. So we are going to look for suspects to come to our site in whichever way you got them to do. Then we got to put some qualification barriers to see, are they really my prospects or not? Once you have taken them down the funnel to make them into a prospects, they're not going to buy right away. Even in a retail environment, sometimes people are ready to buy there and then, but many times they do their shopping, they come back multiple times, then they will buy at some point. So if I'm ready to buy, and if you have not been in the front of my mind, I am not going to buy from you. So this is why it is really important, once you have a prospect, how do you set up what I call a follow-up wall? Make sure you continue to engage with them, even if they're not buying today, even if they're not buying in 3 months from now. It obviously depends on your sales cycle sometimes. If your product can be bought within 3 months, yes, great idea. You continue to follow up with them for some time. If your sales cycle happens to be 9 months long, maybe you need to follow up with them for almost 18 to 24 months. So that is the key. Now, most of the sales funnel stop at customers, but this is something that world has changed. We don't buy a product and just stop. We actually look for reviews. We want to see what the other people said. We want to talk to, we'll go on social media. We'll, look at discussion forums. Even for buying a $5 product today, we probably spend $100 of our energy trying to evaluate if this is the right product. So what is your job? Your job as a founder doesn't end at making customers, but it only ends when you cross that, what I call a love wall, to create references. People who love your product, who are willing to talk about it without being bribed, who really have something that you've really created something of value for them. Not just because they are your relatives or your friends, but you got to go beyond that circle to really prove that indeed you have a play. Now, we won't talk about this in great detail, but let's just, we don't have time for that. So let me just go talk about the part 3. How do you do your initial sales? And I have some YouTube videos which go into the detail of all of these 3 sections. You can Google, I think, R. Paul Singh and TiE. I think I did it initially for TIE, TIE. So anyway, so I think the days of sales that we are used to, door to door, all that stuff, are gone. So I'm going to focus. And by the way, if any of you is interested, I think this is a great book to see how and why selling has changed. This is a book by Daniel Pink talking about to sell is human. And no, I don't get any commission from him, but I really love the concept, because even though it's been known to us, he's just brought it to the front to say, hey, we are all in sales, but we need to think differently as to how sales are done today rather than the old ways of doing sales. So I think the bottom line on selling, and this is very important for any of the founders, and that is, number one, you got to put yourself in the shoes of your customers. That's what I call attunement. Secondly, as they say, you know, if you are familiar with the principle of buoyancy, sales process is a very, what should I say? It's a very, sometimes it can be really, it can bring you down, right? Because the number of successes versus the number of failures is maybe like, 1 in 10 if you're lucky. So you got to really try and lift yourself up. If you try to do a sale and it doesn't work, doesn't mean it's the end. You got to continue to learn from each of these experiences, because one of the job of a startup founder is to always be listening, to always be learning and adapting. So this is really key, that you have to make sure that you can achieve. And then last but not the least is clarity. A clarity of message, a clarity of what you do, who do you do it for, and why you. Same 3 W's. They are really important. It's not just about the elevator pitch anymore. We are, elevator pitches may take 45 seconds. And by the way, in COVID, there may not be anybody in that elevator with you. So you got to find a different way to reach people. And nowadays they have even lesser time. So you got to make sure that there is a message that is very clear, that hits the nerves, and that hits the right nerves, so you can really get to that sales. And remember, if you don't sell as a startup, you die. You could have the most amount of money in your bank, but if you have no customers, you're not going to survive. So if I have to pick between number one function for a startup to succeed, I would say sell, sell, sell. And sell doesn't mean, go in this old way of pushing, 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 but selling means finding the needs of the customer and fulfilling that need, trying to realize what is that segment that you are going to try to fill the needs for. So with that, thank you very much.